our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station. The Global.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Good evening to you at home or in your vehicle if you are on the road or at work or listening on the radio or on the internet in Dominica or abroad. Thank you for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 10th February 2026, the sixth Tuesday of 2026, and it's just about 8 p.m. in the studios at Q95, the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages, or on-air phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro Caribbean brothers and sisters. It is our fourth Global View on Q show for 2026, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. With me tonight is my co-host, Justice Dr. Irving Andre, social scientist Simeon Joseph. Father Herman Chapless is here with us again, and former Dominica UN Ambassador Christian Gregoire is also here with us tonight. We will discuss the future role of migration and remittances in keeping with the historical development of Dominica, which once cherished justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. There are some issues and questions, if you like, some talking points that we will look at tonight. What are the prospects for migration and remittances in keeping with the historical development of Dominica, where justice, peace, and the integrity of creation once flourished? What will be the impact of the fallout of the CBI program? Will it affect the international airport? Will it affect livelihoods in Dominica? What else will it affect? We will explore those. What is our understanding of the notion of peace? And what do we see as the current threats to rightful peace in Dominica? Are our people aware that without justice, peace is elusive, and without peace, injustice will always prevail? So, is justice and peace now becoming a relic of a bygone age? What is the position and response of civil society on the tensions between issues of justice, peace, and the environment? Dominicans are now suffering in silence. Is hope diminishing among many of our citizens? Are we now living the realities of collapsed systems that are supposed to ensure justice and peace and prosperity? Where do civil society and the other local organizations stand on the divisions that exist as a result of these invisible walls that are now separating us as a people? Where do they stand? Are Dominicans and the organizations which are supposed to advocate for good order, accountable government, and right thinking still committed to that cause? Well, if so, why are they so silent and seemingly complicit? What is the role of the youth in shaping and taking ownership of the future that they will inherit? How much longer will we tolerate the abuse of our natural resources in all of their forms? So we look forward to the contributions of Justice Dr. Irving Andre, social scientist Simeon Joseph, Father Herman Chapless, and former Dominica UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire, and callers and viewers on the radio, on Facebook, on YouTube, on the future role of migration and remittances in keeping with the historical development of Dominica, which once cherished justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. So, as usual, we invite you, our Q family, and friends of Dominica to help us give our usual Huge shout out and big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and public and private sector patriots and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. And as I always say, we welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region, and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console, directing the traffic. We will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on Q and on the Global View on Q. So call us anytime during the program, and Lambi will signal us when you call. My co-host and guest panelists will expand and deliver on their own ideas on the topic. But here's a bit of housekeeping before we start. Each panelist will divide their contributions into five-minute presentations, and we'll also have an opportunity to make a closing remark. As I go to Dr. Irving Andre, let me pose a question to begin with. In the face of the US and Europe imposing visa restrictions on Dominica due to CBI due diligence failures, and in view of the US aggression towards Venezuela and China and Cuba, three countries with whom the current DLP regime has very close working relations in terms of fuel supplies, international airport construction, and recruiting Cuban doctors for healthcare. What do you think are Dominica's prospects of survival of remittances if the US puts an embargo on Western Union and MoneyGram transferring funds to Dominica in retaliation for these cozy relations? What would happen to the 52 million of annual remittances or $1 million a week that assist Dominicans in paying their daily living bills? I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his first 5-minute opening comments on the future role of migration and remittances in keeping with the historical development of Dominica, which once cherished peace and the integrity of creation. Let's get the ball rolling, Dr. Andre. You need to unmute your mic.
Good evening to the laptop, which is operating at its own volition. But in any event, let us proceed. The question you pose, the answer is not blowing in the winds. It's staring you in the face. The impact of the CBI on the CBI of U.S. action in the face of a predatory sale of passport scheme will be catastrophic. It's as simple as that. Why? Because Dominicans rely so heavily, many Dominicans, on whether it's the barrels or whether it's the periodic receipt of cash from relatives abroad, particularly in the United States, whether in the United Virgin Islands or the American mainland. And the attention on Dominica, for all the wrong reasons, it will make Dominicans abroad wary of sending cash, even kind, to their relatives, because there is a rebuttable presumption that monies going through, whether it's Western Union or whatever it is, may be tainted. Because the word on the street among diplomatic circles is that the Dominican electorate is peddling in dirty money. There's no question about it. We have anecdotal evidence on the ground. There is evidence as to the sale of diplomatic passport to certain persons. The persons who have done the selling, and even the amount of money, is known to Dominicans on the ground, let alone intelligence services, whether in England, whether in the United States, or whether in France. It is also known that the money has been laundered to some degree through the purchase of real property, whether it's in New York, certainly in Dominica, whether it's in Dubai. It's an open secret that Dominica has, quite frankly, violated U.S. sanctions in terms of oil, the embargo on Iran. So all this...
You've muted your mic. You need to unmute.
If the U.S. decide to take action against these small islands who are undermining the so-called security architecture of the United States, there are persons on the ground, apologists, accomplices, acolytes, who are quick to say that the US actions has precious little to do with the CBI program. Absolute nonsense. It has everything to do with it because it has all the elements of corruption. And the Europeans warned Dominica sometime last year that one of the key concerns they have, I believe they call it Article 5 or something 5, number 5, whatever it is. And that is to say, the system is corrupt because the net proceeds of sale of these passports are not being deposited into the island's consolidated fund. It's an open secret. It's a secret which is hiding in plain view. We in Dominica, we know it because it explains the sudden wealth which many persons just seem to be enjoying overnight. It explains why so much money is spent on building hotels at a time where our hotel occupancy in Dominica is at a historic low. It explains that obsession. It explains why, for example, there are all kinds of vague explanations in terms of what's happening to those net proceeds of sale. There's a so-called housing option. We know that what is being spent on some of these initiatives is a complete waste of money because the quality of these buildings is so poor. And we know that because there's been numerous examples of that. Sewage systems not operating properly, a secondary school, at least part of it, the roof of part of that school just collapsing. We were promised an engineer's report or a report within 30 days. It's now over 6 months. It hasn't seen the light of day. And to crown it all, we have the most cynical efforts to continue to rig the elections by manipulating and gerrymandering the whole so-called confirmation process. You can imagine the indignation of a patriot who listened to the Sakinoy, Ante Joseph, I think. I don't know if she's related to Simeon, but anyway, talking about how they work, the commissioners on the Electoral Commission, they work as a team. They work as a team because they're all interested in free and fair elections. What a hogwash. We know exactly it is hogwash because 3 of these members of the team, they are very much in the very belly of the nefarious trafficking, and it's trafficking, of Dominican passports. So they have a self-interest in that activity. So they have an interest to ensure that the electorate, that the political directorate remain entrenched in power because that is the only means for them to continue benefiting on the backs of Dominicans. So the whole question of CBI has a very strong role to play in the welfare and well-being, or should I say the lack thereof, of Dominicans on the ground. Because let's face it, the average, so-called average Dominican doesn't really benefit in any significant way from all this money which has been hidden in mysterious accounts. On the contrary, the bulk of that money is being deposited, as some of the insiders have said to us, in mysterious accounts in Europe, in Dubai also, and other countries. We know that it is being used to feather the financial nest of those involved in the scheme. So whatever Dominicans on the ground receive, whether it's a 1 or 2%, for God's sakes, whether it's $800 a month, or let's make it $1,000 for God's sakes, what they are receiving can only be described as pittances to keep them happy, to keep them clapping when the Prime Minister says, I have my insurance, and by implication, Zopani, to keep them in a state of perpetual slumber, or to keep them in a perpetual or perennial stupor. So the new dispensation with respect to the CBI and the steps taken by the United States and England, I should say, and soon to be Europe, will have a very chilling effect on the lives of Dominicans, particularly those who are not involved at that level in terms of the manipulation of Dominica's assets and the manipulation of the electoral process. Last sentence, manipulation of the electoral process will have one fundamental result. It will keep the majority of Dominicans in a state of perpetual poverty. I'll have more to say about immigration or later.
Yes, thanks a lot for these opening remarks, Justice Dr. Irving Andre. Now, Simeon, you are Father Sharpless accused you of being the man of the cloth in the house. So what are your opening remarks on this topic tonight? You want to...
My mic is on mute.
Yeah, your mic is okay.
Well, for some reason or other, good night, gentlemen. Good night to your listeners. And
good night.
It's good being here again tonight discussing a very relevant topic. So I don't know why Father Sharpless wants to down his cloth and put it on me. I really don't know. But nonetheless, I think it's important to how you call it now, acknowledge his kindly overtures, you know. Anyway, I think we're discussing a very pertinent topic tonight, given all the questions that have been raised before us. Justice Andrew, thanks very much for your opening remarks. I think it broadly covered a lot of all the issues that we are facing today. I must say, one thing that has been on my mind over this past a few days has been this whole, I would say, commerce of electoral reform in Dominica. It's sad. It's sad to see that such a major pillar of democracy is being played around like deflated football, not being able to score any goals. And I think we should, by then, as a country, have a decent confidence that the foundation for our democracy, which is free and fair elections, is being upheld, and being promoted and programmed to be efficient. I've been thinking these last few days of the utterances of the Chief Elections Officer and thinking back, chronologically about all the efforts by many people to have free and fair elections. It is sad. It's very sad that we are at that stage. I think so much talk, so much work has gone into it, and it seems it's going to be something very elusive. I have never been one to support all this talk about electoral reform thing, because I've been able to console myself that nobody who is corrupt in power, nobody who has gotten into power illicitly, no one who is getting gains while in office is going to allow anybody to have free and fair elections. It's equally sad to see that so many Dominicans are very ambivalent, apathetic, nonchalant about what is happening. My hope can only be that when the time comes for them to go into that box, they will make the right decisions. However, I would like to say, by just my opening comment, is when we pursue justice and peace and the integrity of creation, we need to be mindful that is essential for building a more equitable and a more sustainable world and society. Because, people have to live, simply. And so by when we commit ourselves to the values of justice, when we commit ourselves to the values of peace, when we commit ourselves to the values of integrity, of all that exists, all that pertains for human beings to survive, we're committing to the values of, by committing these values, we need to understand that individuals and communities can work towards a future that honors the dignity of all people, okay, and the health of our environment, our planet, and our country. And so what we need to be mindful of is that as we speak about those things, we have to engage those principles, not only to ensure that they exist, but that they have to reflect a deep commitment to our social and environmental justice. That's why I started that way tonight. But we also have to be mindful that it's supposed to align us with the teachings of our traditions that advocate for the well-being of humanity and mankind as a whole. And I'm saying all of this to say that, you know, we live in a world today, we live in a society, we live in a country which defies the very mandate of, and that's where I'm going to come in theologically, Father Sharpless, which defies the very mandate of any decent human being. We know I think it's in the book of John, Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and they may have it more abundantly. And I think it's very egregious and it grieves to know that there are people living today who cannot live abundant lives because of the lack of justice, because of the denial of peace, and I mean shalom in all its sense, and because the systems and the structures and the opportunities that ought to exist to ensure that we have a more equitable and sustainable world for people to live is seriously lacking. I think that is very sad. And I think that should highlight to many of us what I started on, the need to ensure that a country has free and fair elections. It is the opportunity when people get to decide who governs over them that determines how just their society is, how peaceful their society is, and how everything else that is supposed to support the foundation of their lives survives or exists on a certain level of integrity. So I think in my opening, very brief 5 minutes opening statement, so that's what I like to speak on, and to say that we need to emphasize a certain integration of the values of justice, peace, and integrity in every sphere of our efforts, so that we can create a kind of relationship where there's equality and inclusion of all peoples. I hope I'm not sounding too theoretical, but I'm saying this because I think if we now, as a nation in Dominica, do not grasp the fact that if we continue to sleep, if we continue to ignore the signs of the times, if we continue to be ambivalent and neutral and apathetic to all the dangers that we see around us, if we continue to be nonchalant about all these things that threaten our very survival and existence and stability, we might just have to blame ourselves for what is to come. And I will end my opening statement from how I begin. I tonight am deeply troubled that Dominica may never have another free and fair election. And when I recall in history how much Dominicans have been involved in fighting for quote unquote justice, it grieves me to see that many of the people of the past who would champion justice and good governance today are complicit with every level of functioning that undermines our society today. And it's saddening. To me, it's heartbreaking. I listen to the chief elections officer on the radio, and I listen to, and I've been observing certain things. I heard a press conference. I watched a press conference by the Ministry of Health last week, and that was even more disheartening, where people just do not want to take ownership of their own responsibilities to make life better for people. And we seem to be subsumed in some sort of complicity, for want of a better word. We have already compromised. We've been totally compromised. Dominica is a compromised country. From the church, when we spoke about last week, to people of profession, to professions, to all, maybe every sector in society. Perhaps maybe it's only Crispin Gregor, Father Sharpless, and Judge Andre who have not been compromised in Dominica. You know, perhaps. But it seems everybody's compromised. And apart from being so compromised at every strata of our society, people are very complicit and complacent. It bothers me. I'm not going to make it cause me to get any make me sick, for want of a better word. But this complacency that we are faced with in Dominica today by our youth, by our professionals, by our intellectuals, by our trade unions, by all the or how you call it, superfluous graduates that we have. Everybody's graduating from so many things in Dominica. Not that I'm against people pursuing academic excellence or academic what you call it, upgrading themselves. But it seems to me that we have a population that is just existing in a kaleidoscope or whirlwind that of going nowhere. And who is going to rescue Dominica? Who's going to ensure that values of fairness and equity in all aspects of life finds its way in every aspect of our society? Who's going to ensure that we have an absence of conflict that encompasses everything that will bring a certain level of harmony and reconciliation among our individuals and our communities? And who's going to ensure that we emphasize the need to care for what God has given to earth, to us, most and foremost, Dominica, the nature isle, after God, the earth? Who's going to ensure and emphasize that we are responsible, we are the stewards to advocate for certain practices that essentially ensure that we have a livable country for future generations? I think I'm going to end there.
Yes, thanks a lot for this opening remarks, Simeon, and very, very well said, very well put as well. Father Sharpless, it's nice to have you with us again this evening. You're a man that we don't see very often. We don't hear from very often, except in certain circumstances. But what are your further thoughts to add to what Simeon had to say in his opening remarks?
Well, I would thanks again for the invitation. And it's always a joy to be among so many smart guys, smart people, intelligent people. And of course, a fellow theologian in Simeon as well. To begin, I want to start by speaking of the whole idea of fairness. And I will say that fairness is the foundation of any democratic society. Fairness must not only be consistently achieved, it must also be obvious. Fairness being the foundation of the democratic society is an illusion if it is not practiced. And from what Dr. Andrea and Irvin said, and Simeon said, the word fairness just remains stuck in my mind. If a society does not practice fairness, the society moves into decadence. And every issue that will be discussed here, we cannot lose focus on fairness. Now, those of us who are in authority, those of us who hold positions in authority, the only way our impact will be felt and that will touch everybody positively is if we remain fair. That is why in the Old Testament, the prophets were vigorously condemned injustice and oppression of the poor, viewing it as a direct violation of covenant law and an affront to God. Any society that sees unfairness and injustice must have people who are willing to stand up. Figures like Amos, Isaiah, and Micah denounce injustices across the board. And that's why sometimes I wonder if some of us really understand what our mission is. These guys denounced so much injustice, denounced the wealthy for exploiting, for robbing, and neglecting the vulnerable, specifically widows and orphans and foreigners, while demanding that social justice and mercy take precedence over empty religious rituals. I'm going to repeat it, empty religious rituals. Maybe as a society we are very religious, but are we standing up against the evil that continues to be so visible in our society. So, key prophetic themes of these prophets on injustices is one, abuse of power. Prophets condemned leaders, elders, and the wealthy for using their position to exploit the poor, to exploit the vulnerable, to exploit those who are not as powerful and influential, those who don't have the power to make a difference. Another point that they condemn heavily was economic exploitation. Amos criticized those who sold the innocent for silver, trampled on the needy, and imposed heavy rents or unjust taxes on grain. I mean, Amos was really condemning. Another one that they spoke, another issue that they also attacked was systemic injustice. Systemic injustice. Isaiah is well known for doing that. He denounced leaders who enact unjust laws and issued oppressive decrees, thereby denying the poor and the vulnerable their right in court. And misplaced worship. God, through the prophets, rejected religious rituals, fasting, sacrifice, and otherwise, from people who simultaneously oppressed the vulnerable. So Amos, known as the champion of social justice, he declared that God would punish those who turn away the poor, the vulnerable, from justice at the gates. Isaiah pronounced, "Woe upon those who make the poor, the vulnerable, their prey, and steal the rights of the needy." Jeremiah condemned kings for building palaces through unpaid labor and ignoring the rights of the poor. Micah famously summarized God's requirement as doing justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with God, in contrast to robbery of the poor by the wealthy. So right there from the Bible, we see how these issues were tackled and how these issues were dealt with. And so if we are where we are as a country, as a state, it means we have allowed these things to go on for too long, and it's long overdue. We must do something about it. If we are going to find inspiration from the Word of God, if we say we are believers and we love Jesus, we have to understand that the mission given to us is to stem out all forms of injustices in the society so that we can have a fair, balanced society where everyone has a voice and everyone is happy. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot, Father Sharpless, for your opening remarks here. I would want to go now to Crispin Gregoire. But Crispin, you heard the call for fairness as a foundation of any democratic society. You've listened to the opening remarks about remittances and the threat, the possible threat to the potential threat to remittances due to these failures of due diligence in the CBI program. And that the US, in fact, could consider, I mean, you can see how the US is blockading the Caribbean. I mean, it's blockading Cuba, it's blockading Venezuela. And who knows, will the US turn its attention then to Dominica? Your thoughts on that? You're muted. You need to unmute, Crispin.
Yeah. Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we're hearing you now.
Good evening, Mr. G. Good evening, fellow panelists. Good evening to listeners of Q95 Global View. I'm very honored to be among such distinguished fellow panelists, Father Sharpless, Simeon Joseph, and Dr. Andre. Well, Mr. G, you gave us a long list of questions, issues, and talking points, and I felt that the onus would be on me to pick something in there. So there are two things that I will focus on tonight. One is the whole status of civil society in Dominica. I would say over the last 20 years, we have seen civil society sort of decline in having its presence. The civil society is moving to disorganization. I mean, when I think of the 1970s decades and the 1980s, they were, and also into the 1990s, civil society in Dominica was pretty strong. When you look today as what has happened to civil society over the last 20 years, you begin to wonder, why aren't people taking stands? Why aren't people speaking out? Why aren't people educating themselves about civics? Why, so there's a dynamic at play that is problematic in our country that we need to examine. And if we don't take steps to prevent civil society from collapsing, then we will have a chaotic country. And it's unfortunate that the democratic space for the growth of the civil society has been squeezed, and civil society has faced repressive arm of the state has come down on civil society. So Dominicans are afraid to talk. They're afraid to express themselves. People have to be speaking in harsh terms if they are saying anything critical of the government or any persons in society who are doing things that are not palatable. So that, Mr. G, that concerns me. That's a really serious development that has happened over the last 20 years. And Rosie Douglas and Pierre Charles would not, I'm sure they would not be happy if they were alive to see the quality of our civil society. Mr. G, I have been active with the electoral reform campaign and the coalition, simply because I believe that the foundation of our democracy is really in crisis, and that we have to do everything to get our government to accept the fact that we don't have a dictatorship or an autocracy operating. It might have some elements of that, but we're not quite there in a full-blown dictatorship, but we seem to be heading there. And that will militate negatively for civil society development. So that was one of the things that I felt would be important to focus on, and I will probably not say more on this and yield back to the chair. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Christine, for those opening remarks. Dr. Andre, you heard all of these remarks made by Simeon, by Father Sharpless, and by Crispin. Let's go back and talk about some of the things that we put on the table here tonight. Dominicans are really now suffering in silence. And as the question, is hope diminishing among many of our citizens? Are we now living the realities of collapsed systems that are supposed to ensure justice and peace and prosperity? I'd like to hear your comments on some of those. And you need to unmute your mic.
Well, we're experiencing some of the impacts of a lack of governance based on principles of peace, comity, and togetherness, and so on. In fact, I had made a note to myself that what we're witnessing as we speak, the manifestation of what I refer to as the 10 deadly sins of the lack of good governance, or the lack of peace, order, and good governance in Dominica. And it seems to me that electoral fraud is certainly one of the most significant, but electoral fraud is a mere end product of greed, because electoral fraud is being manifested because of the desire to remain in power indefinitely, And what motivates someone to want to remain in power definitely is not to help his people, at least not in the case of Dominica. It's to help himself and a few cronies. So greed manifested through electoral fraud, in my view, counts among one of the most deadliest of sins in Dominica. You obviously have the desecration and destruction of the environment. Again, why, in my respectful view, it should be attributable to greed. It makes no sense that you will destroy a mountain to look for stones with the right density. These folks are making Dominican fools to believe that nonsense. They are doing what whoever is responsible are doing best all over Africa and elsewhere. They're looking for minerals. They're looking for a certain type of mineral, or a certain type of material, or whatever you want to call it, that will assist these folk. You do not destroy it by saying that you're looking for rocks. And it cannot be coincidence that the only place they have identified as having rocks of the correct density is where there was a suspicion, or there was some evidence that there were fairly significant copper deposits in that area. You can believe that if you want, but then again, some of us still believe that the earth is wrong, or is flat, sorry. The unjust enrichment of a few on the backs of the majority with no conscience whatsoever. We have never witnessed that level of in-your-face corruption at any other point in our history. It's right there. The whole business of unemployment, particularly among the young people, because that is another genesis of the involvement in drugs and guns and so on. When you take away hope from young people, and when there's no escape for them, because not everybody has family in abroad, they have to resort to the ethos of the jungle. The unequal enforcement of the law. You were talking about the Prime Minister's son being given a diplomatic passport. And the fella goes on radio and saying, "Boy, that's a common thing, you know. Common thing for your son or your daughter to be involved in some type of accident, somebody's dead, and within a few days he's flown out of the, oh, that's a very common thing, and Dominicans accept that. Nonsense. That is a malady that has become malignant in the body politic of Dominica. The questionable concerns about the justice system, the whole question as to the quality of justice. Now, let me say one thing. We're not talking about the attributes, the intellectual or academic attributes of the judge. That's not the issue here. The issue is whether justice is being dispensed in a fashion free from interference by the political directorate. That's the question. What about the growing persistence of drug trafficking and gun violence? Well, I'm not even going to spend much time on that. We know it. But there's another insidious component of that deadly sin. The suspicion, the anecdotal evidence that these offenses are not being rigorously or robustly prosecuted. Tell me why. Tell me why. What about the growing animosity based on politics, the cynical division of the population between those who support and those who don't? Those who support can do whatever they want. A few weeks ago, someone sent me a video, a meeting in Portsmouth, or a party. The party goers were dressed in red, I should tell you. And some of them were fighting with local police officers. But you know what got to me, Mr. G? And probably I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, correct me. It doesn't seem to me that any one of those persons engaged in physical activity, fighting with police officers, not one was charged. Huh? Can you imagine? Or would you be able to say that? If the police officers were fighting with were supporters of the other side? Do you think that would happen? The obvious answer is no. And there is a perpetual and persistent lack of transparency and accountability in governance. As I said, I listened to the Chief Electoral Office insulting Dominicans by telling them, oh, we work as a team. I think Matt Peltier asked her, well, don't you think that at least 3 members of the commission were supporters of the government? She gave me some ridiculous response. I don't know. Or some nonsense like that, as if she lived in Mars. So what we have is a persistent deniability, a persistent and flagrant violation, as either Simeon or Father Sharpis have indicated, a total compromise of all those institutions of integrity, whether embedded in the Constitution or just as societal norms which have governed Dominica since independence. They're gone. And last but not least, the 10th of the deadliest sins, the misappropriation of public funds for personal enrichment. How many stories have we heard about village councils being given money which becomes unaccounted for? The Petro Caraïbe, the handouts during election times, the brown paper bags. Where is all that money coming from? There's no more share in Dominica, from what I know. So if, to me, it's an academic issue whether we are sliding towards despotism or dictatorship, or whether we are there, in my respectful view, it doesn't really matter. But all the elements of bad governance are growing more exuberantly than zebra in Dominica. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you for those remarks. I want to go to Lambi to maybe give our audience, the listeners, the telephone numbers that they might call in if they wish to, and to make a contribution to the discussion tonight.
The Global View and Q, the numbers are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are all local numbers. The overseas or international number is 305-432-9624. Let me run those numbers one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, and 305-432-9624. Back to you, Mr. G.
Okay, now, so Simeon, let me come to you now. I mean, with all of this being said tonight so far already, and you started commenting on this a little earlier on in your opening remarks, where do civil society and the other local organizations stand on the divisions that exist as a result of the invisible walls that are now separating us as a people? You know, so I mean, if you can, in your comments, maybe just comment on that, I'd appreciate that.
Well, to be honest, I think this is, I could say, I don't want to sound too melancholy tonight, but this is one of my greatest disappointments in modern day Dominica. The role and the involvement of civil society organizations in the stability of Dominica. I don't know if anybody recalls the 70s and the 80s, when we had all these organizations that were championing on and for, and I put in quotation marks, on behalf of the people. Most of those people are still around. Most of those people are still alive. We have situations today where, I don't know, certain organizations, trade unionism is almost dead in Dominica right now. Yeah. And the fact that when we hear what's happening with the trade unions, I think DAO doesn't exist. WAU doesn't exist. What do you call it? WAU, the Dominica Amalgamated Workers Union. WAU seems to be a strong organization of people like Louis Benoit and Curtis Augustus. You wonder, where has that gone to? Even the very prominent Public Service Union. I mean, you listen to their utterances, and everybody seems to be coward, put that way, coward. Then these are some of those that represent what you call certain justice arms of civil society. Then you have certain issues, you have certain organizations like the DAIC, the Dominica Tourism Association, Dominica Employers Federation, and all the other civil society groups that existed, which are supposed to organize for and on behalf of people in Dominica. They're dormant. They're literally dead. You have other organizations, like all the other organizations, like the Social League and all those people that played a part before in sensitizing Dominicans to their responsibility to be conscious citizens and to take ownership of the process of their future. They don't seem to exist anymore. So I don't know if they're compromised or if they are coward, but it seems to me that this is having a serious impact on the undermining of the stability of Dominica today, in the sense that these were, you could say, watchdogs of the society. They would speak, and when they spoke, somebody had to listen because they would hold people accountable. At this point, I must commend Mr. Gregor Nassif for penning an article on the electoral process, the registration process. And he wrote a first article, and he wrote a second article. And I think since he wrote the second article, we have had this cascading of lies by the Electoral Commission, because they had already said that they do not know when registration would begin. And so since he spoke, all of a sudden, from the 9th of March, there's going to be registration, and machines are in place, and this is in place, and that is in place. That speaks of the power of ordinary Dominicans to speak up, to pay attention to what is happening, to highlight the issues, and to speak for and on behalf of people. It doesn't happen. And so I think this is where we are this is where we are at currently in Dominica, because government is only government in as long as it is allowed to be government. Put it that way.
Your internet may have lost a bit.
Government that does not recognize and they need to be given certain benchmarks, and they need to be given certain ultimatums that if this does not happen, then we will. All over the world, that's what civic organizations do. But they're not doing that. They're silent, they're quiet, right? The Medical Association is not speaking up for and on behalf of doctors and nurses. The Bar Association is not speaking up for and on behalf of the inequities of justice in Dominica. The trade unions are not speaking out for and on behalf of their workers. The National Youth Council has all been bought, okay, and is not speaking up for and on behalf or championing the cause of young people in Dominica. Look at this. Look at this. The current electoral law says for you to register to vote, or what has been put, you have to have a driver's license and a social security number, or a passport, sorry. How many young people in Dominica who are 18 years of age, who need to be registered to vote, have a driver's license or even a passport? But the National Youth Council is all but numb on the matter, all but dead on the matter. Do you think in the days when Pierre Charles and other people like that were part of the president of the National Youth Council, they would be silent about that? I remember as a young person being the first president of Labor Youth Organization. And when the National Youth Council, I don't know, Mr. Gregor, if you remember, when their office was on Queen Mary Street, opposite the Chronicle, in that little pink place next to the Nicholson's, in that little pink place there.
Yeah. Yep.
Myself and Neva Schlinford and one other person, the National Youth Council were meeting one morning, and we were part of I was president of the Labor Youth Organization, and we went to a meeting of the National Youth Council, and we had Irving Knight and Rosie Douglas and Pierre Charles and Titus Friends, and they told us because we were part of the Labor, we did not belong as part of the National Youth Council, and they shooed us out. That was the kind of, or you call it now, strong spirited advocacy of the National Youth Council at the time. They felt that because we were part of the government, we did not belong to the National Youth Council. I remember that Saturday morning very clearly. And I remember Pierre Charles coming and Rosie and all these people coming and say, you have to go, because they thought we were coming to spies. That was my experience. That was a certain level of spirited, you call it, attitude by the National Youth Council. So if they could have done that, then today they are basically dormant and dumb about a major issue. The National Youth Council of Dominica should be calling every 17 and 18 and 19-year-old on the street of Roseau on Saturday morning to march around the streets of Roseau demanding that thing be moved. How many young people in Dominica today have a passport or a driver's license to be able to register? And yet you're putting that as a mandate. That is inadvertently disenfranchising many young people from registering to vote. And these people are quite young people. I guess they're all in C1, Bouillon, and Carnival. That's all they're concerned about. But by and large, I don't think we have most of the organizations that are supposed to represent the nurses. You remember the firebrand of the Nurses Association of Ophelia Linton and Jennifer Astafan? Demanding so much for nurses. Remember at one time they demanded 110% increase on behalf of the nurses in 1976, in March 1976, when Isaiah Thomas was Minister of Health. And in the midst of the strike, he got a massive heart attack and died. That was the kind of advocacy that happened with the different organizations. We had the Farmers Union under Afi Mater, with the Castle Bruce Estate. We had all these organizations that championed the cause for and on behalf of people. When the DAT came on the scene under the time of the Eugenia Charles and the Dominica Freedom Party, you remember how vociferous the one fighting for better improving working conditions of teachers. Today, our teachers are treated as almost nothing. Where's the DAT? Where are all these unions? So I would say, Mr. Gregoire, that when it comes to civil society in Dominica, it's all but dead. No one speaks on behalf of anybody nowadays. No one speaks on behalf of the poor. No one speaks on behalf of the disenfranchised. No one speaks on behalf of youth. No one speaks on behalf of anybody who has suffered injustice in Dominica anymore. And so what we are doing is that we are you call it now, becoming entrenching. We are entrenching, so to speak, a certain I would even want to say new paradigm of governance and society, because in the next 5 to 10 years in Dominica, if people do not stand up for themselves, if people do not stand up against wrong, if people do not stand up for justice, if people do not stand up for the integrity of creation in Dominica, I'm not sure where Dominica is going to be. I'm sorry to be speaking gloom and doom, but I'm sorry to say I don't know where Dominica will be. I don't know what fruits the elderly people of Dominica are going to bear. I don't know what the young people of Dominica do. I don't know if the young people of Dominica today are conscious and mindful of the precipitous future that is ahead of them, I don't think so. Because you see, we have the government has taken loans upon loans upon loans from Chinese firms and all other, and we don't know how much it is. It's not you and me that's going to pay for it, Mr. Gregoire, by high taxes and VAT and all kind of imposed tariffs. It's they who are going to pay for it. They are the ones going to pay for it, and they're so, unconcerned about all of those things. The kind of society that Dominica is fostering and breeding today, I'm not sure if the young people of Dominica today understand, and even so many of our young professionals, man, Those between 25 and 35 in the country, they seem to be not even existing. We have a large pool of adults and young adults in Dominica who are totally oblivious to what is happening around them. We don't hear them. We don't see them. They're not involved. They don't participate. They're not in anything, and one wonders, whether it's only the 55 and 60-year-olds in Dominica who are going to carry the future of Dominica on their backs. I end for now.
Thank you so much, Simeon, for that, for really opening the conversation on the question of the lack of advocacy of these social groups, social organizations. I mean, it used to be so vibrant in the earlier years. In fact, they brought about change. In 1979, they certainly brought out a lot of change in the political situation in Dominica. Father Sharpless, if you're in your next set of remarks, could you maybe address your mind for a brief moment on that? But before I come to you, let me go to Lambi for a call.
Well, I'm not sure if the caller is still there. Let's see. Caller, are you still there? Nope. Gone.
The caller is gone. Okay, the caller will call back. So once the caller calls back, you will just make us a signal, Lambi, and we'll go over to you. But Father Sharpless, yes.
Yes. As I listen to
Hold on one second. Lambi wants to take a call. Go ahead, Lambi.
Yeah, caller, please go ahead now.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Gregor and everybody else on the panel.
Good night.
I always like to say I'm a senior citizen. And I have a question for Father Sharpless. I want to say, before I ask the question, I want to say I'm a Catholic. And none of us are perfect. All of us have our sins. Now, the electoral process is very dear to me because I have my family who also want to register. Now, I'm calling Father Sharpless read what is injustice and so on for us, okay? We understand that. Now, an injustice was done to one of our own, Ian Anthony, right? You have a new system and you have a person, Ian, qualified, has a legal background, worked there for years, and it's a new system you have. You're taking a new person who never worked in that office, and you take out Ian. Okay, that is injustice. Now, the other question I want to ask Father Sharpless is, I said I'm a Catholic. Now, we have the president who appointed the chairman of the commission. I am bringing her in. She made the appointment. Now, we need the chairman to come and speak to the nation. Is it in order, Father Sharpless? Now, the president is still a lay associate?
Yeah.
Okay. That's how I'm coming down. So, as I said, none of us are perfect. I'm just throwing out that question. She appointed the chairman. Is it in order that say the hierarchy of the church can speak to the president, and ask her to speak to the chairman of the commission? I'm just throwing out there. Is that in order? Because a lot of injustice is happening. She made the appointment, so I don't know. I'm just asking, can she call the chairman one-on-one and ask him to do what is right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A question like that it's not always easy to answer, in the sense that the structure of the church is very hierarchical, and such authority cannot be given or cannot be commented on directly by a priest. There is a diocesan bishop who is responsible, and he would have to make that outreach. He would be the one who, or he could mandate a member of the clergy to reach out on those issues. But as you rightly says, these are issues that certainly needs to be dealt with, and it goes back to what I started with, the whole idea of fairness. When there is not fairness, and when things are not done justly, or people are not given their rightful position, especially when they're not where they are qualified to carry on responsibilities, and you take somebody that's putting them there, it's utter confusion. There will be problems, and I think I think this is where we are with the issues that we're talking about. And as I listen to Simeon going back to history, I feel pained, because for every generation, we're supposed to pass on to the next generation and next generation, so that advocacy, a major issue in democracy, continues. My question is, where did it drop? Where have we failed? And when I read the prophets, and these guys, they were real, if one would call them, they were real politicians, because they really focused on the major social issues that affected the people at the time. That Prophet Amos he condemns social injustice. He condemned the social injustice, particularly the oppression of the poor, corruption in the courts, and other forms of corruption, and empty religious rituals practiced by the wealthy elite in Israel. Amos put no water in his mouth to condemn those things. The question is, where is that level of advocacy in our society today? He demands that justice roll down like water in Amos chapter 5:24. He emphasizing that true worship is inseparable from religious living and caring for the vulnerable. The question is, we consider ourselves a religious society. Why are these issues not addressed by us, the religious people? Why are we afraid to talk? Why is it that we are so concerned about, we have gotten to the point where, and I think that's our problem, people are more concerned about their well-being, and the concern about the other is almost non-existent. And I'm reminded of the golden rule: treat others the way you like them to treat you. And the commandment, love God, and I that commandment always inspires me. It says, love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the part dealing with the neighbor, it does not say love yourself as your neighbor. It says love your neighbor as yourself. So the way you love your neighbor, that's how you love yourself. Is that the reality that we are living in today, where so much is going on, and as the caller says, and she's concerned about a lot of what Simeon mentioned? Is it that we have gotten to the point where we turn the commandment around, where we love ourselves first, to the point that we don't love the neighbor, and that we are not concerned about the well-being of the few in society who consider themselves suffering? What is happening to that society? Amos, in condemning the wealthy, Amos decried the upper class for living in luxury while trampling the heads of the destitute into the dust. Corruption and injustice. He says he blasted judges and leaders for accepting bribes, cheating in business, and perverting justice at the city gates. These things happened thousands of years ago. They are biblical. Amos also spoke about true worship versus ritualism. He says God rejects the festival songs and sacrifices of the people because their actions are unjust. Are we going to get there at some point where God, or maybe is that our reality today? Therefore, he called for action. Amos demands that people hate evil, love good, and maintain justice in the courts to avoid judgment. Amos' message serves as a critical criteria for our modern society, for our Dominica, and for the time in which we're living. So that all of these issues that we are talking about, all the injustices that we see, probably, Mr. G, as I said, I wanted to question you as well, can there be justice without peace? And as he said, without justice, peace is elusive. Without peace, justice is elusive, is a profound, often cited, and symbolic concept, frequently encapsulated by the slogan, "No justice, no peace." It suggests that true harmony and fairness are interdependent, where one cannot exist without the other. The question is, there are issues that the society needs to address, and we need the civil society and others in society to take up the flag and help those who may not, whose eyes are still closed, those who are still blinded to this reality, help to open their eyes so that they can be the voices that speak for the justice and bring about justice. As Amos says, justice must flow like a river. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Brother Herman Sharpless. I don't know whether Crispin is with us at this time. Well, if Crispin is not with us, I would probably just go momentarily to Justice Dr. Irving Andre. And Dr. Andre, in keeping with the theme that has been postulated by Simeon.
Crispin back. Crispin is right here.
Crispin is back.
Oh, Crispin, you're back with us? All right. So I don't know whether you've been hearing some of what has been said. And if you would like to comment further on that. And of course, the question we posed initially, are people aware that without justice, peace is elusive, and without peace, injustice will always prevail. I don't know whether you had any comments on that, and any comments on the lack of advocacy from the civic organizations in Dominica today.
Yeah, it seems like we have a little bit of technical challenge because sometimes I'm hearing and other times I'm not. It's kind of freezing, but you hear?
Yeah, I'm experiencing the same thing myself.
Hearing me?
Yes, but we're hearing you. We're hearing you.
Hello?
Oh, well, you seem to be having some.
I don't think you're hearing me.
I can hear you, but it's breaking up, eh?
Lambi, you want to take
It's
a call?
frozen.
Hold on, let's take a call from Lambi while we sort that out.
Good evening, caller, please. Caller, please go ahead.
You've lost the call?
Hold on.
You've lost the caller? Okay, well, Crispin, maybe you can try again. Let's see if the internet is strengthened now. You're not hearing me. Dr. Irving Andre, if you're hearing me, maybe you could take it from there, and then when Crispin, his internet gets sorted, he could come back with us.
Well, you made a curiously ironic statement.
Can you hear me?
A few seconds ago. You said,
I can hear you well, but I don't know if you're hearing me.
so you want Crispin to go ahead?
Well, Crispin, is your internet all right now? I'm hearing you now. Can you want to go ahead?
He's not
I
hearing.
don't know.
You're not hearing us. So let's go with Dr.
Can you hear
Andre.
me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's go with Dr. Andre for the time being, because
Okay.
you're not hearing us.
The point I was making is that you made a curiously ironic statement. And I think you said something to the effect that you're not sure that people know that you can't have peace without justice. Well, if their leaders don't know that, then what do you expect? What was the slogan with respect to Venezuela and the Americans? Reach the zone of peace. That was the slogan. And what these leaders meant is that they turned a blind eye to injustice in other islands such as Dominica.
Crispin, could you mute your mic? We're having some feedback coming in from one of the mics. I'm not sure where it's coming from.
It might be Simeon, according to my screen, or Crispin.
Okay.
Because it doesn't look like they muted.
All right,
like
Simeon, mute your mic, please. Right.
Yeah, Simeon is good.
Yeah.
Crispin is not muted. Yes, no,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So my whole point is, it's an indictment of our leadership in the region, because their notion of peace is to turn the blind eye to what is happening in the islands. Well, it's worse than that. It is not just to turn a blind eye, it is to be complicit in dictatorial rule in the islands. How else can you explain the RSS being invited on numerous occasions to come to Dominica, even on the eve of an election? How else can you justify the RRS participating in the tear gas of a village known to be supportive of the opposition on the very eve of an election? How else can you explain the fact that some of these very same leaders, they come to Dominica preaching a gospel of democracy, and they ignore every piece of evidence that what we have in Dominica is an abortion and a negation of democracy? So that we cannot look to the leadership of the region for any type of direction or example in terms of the peace and justice, the intertwined nature of these two concepts. Even Peter Tosh knows, for example, but they don't know because they are all in this thing together. That's the problem. They're all in this thing together. To some extent, or to varying extents, they've been contaminated by the vices of Caribbean leadership, evidenced by the recent conviction of a premier of, is it the Turks and Caicos Islands? Whatever, I don't remember. For what? Huh? For mocking the Queen? No, for money laundering and corruption. Some more than others. But that is the cancer that is afflicting the body politic in the West Indies. It has metastasized. And all of those who go on a pulpit and preach the gospel of goodness, it's just a matter of how far you are digging or how much evidence you're looking for to understand that it's all rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything. And that's what's happening. That is what, quite frankly, is making it so difficult for those who can't afford, the elderly, young people who can't have a job, persons who have to depend on programs such as the NEP. Why they have to keep silent? Because there are no options, because their governments have not provided them with any options. If you're a fisherman, you can only sell how much you catch. If you're a farmer, you can only sell how much you can sell in the market, because no ships have been provided. No markets have been cultivated. If you're an orange farmer, you have to make sure that the birds or whoever it is they don't eat them from the tree itself, because there's no agro processing in Dominica whatsoever. So we live in an island which is now bereft of opportunities, bereft of any type of alternatives to earn a living. And if you are bold enough to try to start an initiative of your own, they sabotage it. Remember what happened to Danny Legault and Dr. Townsend Fontaine when they tried to sell the farmers' produce in the French Islands? Remember the reaction of the political directors? Remember how one enterprising fellow opened a factory making toilet paper? They went out of their way to make sure that Venezuela didn't buy any of those. That's the reality. So the whole notion of peace and justice, quite frankly, they are as alien in Dominica as, for example, a Morocco with 6 legs. And that is where Dominicans have to come. They have to rescue the island from that abyss of despair. Let me just end on this one note. Father Sharpless is there, he's an expert. Simeon is one too. I tried to remember what happened when these 10 lepers came to Jesus Christ. What did Christ say to them? What is it? Parfait or whatever it was, whatever the word is. Leave me alone. All you stay away from me. Is that what he said?
No, there were 10 of them were healed, but
only one came. And he said, were they not 10?
And were they not 10? That's right.
Were they not 10? But he didn't tell them, go about your business.
Where the
Don't
other
touch
9?
Me, go back in your hole. in the forest or wherever it is? No. The question is very simple. Would you say with any degree of sincerity or truthfulness that that parable epitomizes and exemplifies the type of leadership we have today? I leave it to you to answer.
All right, Lambi, you want to take a call?
We're going to try again. Caller, please go ahead. Caller? Yeah, something happened there. This person come back.
All right. Well, so you're having some difficulties with the telephone line. All right. So you'll if the caller calls back, you'll make us a signal, Lambi. Let me go back over to you have a call on the line, Lambi? Okay. Let me go over to Crispin Gregor. Crispin, I don't know whether you're hearing me. Hold on 1 second. Lambi, take a call.
Yeah, let's try it again. Caller, are you there? Yes,
Hello?
go. Please go ahead.
Good evening, this is Dairampu here.
Good evening, nurse. How are you?
Well, not too bad now.
Okay.
I'll talk something about injustice.
Okay.
I believe that I have got the worst injustice in my life in Dominica. And for that reason, no justice, no vote. I'm not voting. I cannot deal with this stress in this country. My son was murdered in Roseau. 8 stabs, his aorta was cut, his lungs was cut, and all different parts of his body was cut. He died from the time they picked him up. When he fell on in the train, he died. They brought him up to the hospital. And I mean, everybody knew what happened. They arrest people and they make a big issue. So I believe that justice would prevail. I'm understanding that nobody paid for it, no justice, they don't know who killed, they don't know who didn't kill. And a man came here last year to ask me pardon because he wants to go and take Holy Communion in church. And he was in the place where they paid $250,000 to throw my child case outside. How a mother like me, nobody asked me no question after the case was thrown out. Nobody called the radio to say, well, at least that news should be on the radio, that Nurse Dairampu didn't get justice. Nobody thought of me. Nobody believes I am a human being. My whole life, I look about children in Dominica, and my one child I had was murdered like a dog in the street, and I got no justice. I don't understand how this country working. Nobody has seen anything after they say no justice. According to who it is? The mother of the boy came up the road, danced for me, laughed at me the case loss, the first day, the Sunday morning, that lady dancing, laughed. Pottersville people are to run and say, hey, laugh. That's not right for a mother to suffer that after she lost her only child. I cannot vote. People are advising me to go and vote, but you see me, I am not part of Dominica. Nobody come to you, no government will call and say, well, what happened or what went wrong, where we can maybe help or where we can intervene in the situation. They just left me, and it was carnival, they just left me like nobody. Another thing I want to ask Olivia now, if a person asks for $64,000 to rent their own, to fix up their own, finish bill of their home or bill of their home for 2 years, I would like to ask Olivia 2 years to end yet. And I'd like to ask all you, if after that house finish and the government leave office, if that house would not be turned back for the state, there's too much injustice in this country and everybody eyes closed. What is going on here? I would like to answer me how many years that 64,000 been paid for that house, Papa? Anybody can answer me there?
Dr. Andre, I would like you to maybe answer the nurse on her son, the injustice, that I feel her pain, and also see if you can answer the question on the $64,000 a month.
Well, let me say good evening to the nurse. I know her. She probably doesn't know that I know her, but I certainly know her. And I've heard her on the radio, and I think her story is a very poignant, very sad one. I don't know. I don't have details about the exchange of money. What I do know, I believe I do, is that there was some evidentiary challenge in Dominica as to the admissibility of video evidence If I'm wrong, I hope somebody correct me. And my understanding is that the evidence was excluded. I can tell you that certainly in the court I have worked since 1991, to the extent that that is why the case was dismissed, such a result would not have happened in Canada. I can tell you that much, in the city where I preside, because videotaped evidence, if taken under the right circumstances, is very powerful evidence. So if that is the reason, or one of the reasons, that the case was dismissed, and then I can tell you that that is a decision, that is a result which would not have obtained in the city of Brampton or in the city or in the province of Ontario. But I would have to know more about the facts of the case. But that's my understanding as to why the charge or charges against the accused were withdrawn or was withdrawn. That is to say, that evidence was ruled inadmissible. As to why it was ruled inadmissible, I would have to read the decision. But if my understanding is correct, I can tell you that result would not have been the same in the jurisdiction where I've presided for 23 years. I can tell you that much. But this is correct. You can't have peace without justice. Justice is a precondition for peace. If people feel that, quite frankly, they are second-class citizens in their own country, how do you expect them to talk about justice? If people are deprived of their land, owned by their parents, by their grandparents, by their great-grandparents, they're dispossessed of that land, and they're not compensated, how can you with a straight face expect them to talk about justice? Oh, I love peace. The peace they're interested in is peace of their own. That's the peace that they want, as in PIECE. And everybody, quite frankly, who has some type of fidelity to the teachings as set out in the Bible, will understand that, quite frankly, that peace will be elusive. And unfortunately, for many people in Dominica, that is the state of affairs that exists as we speak. It's ridiculous. What about Glenn Emanuel? Remember that case? Remember the Glenn Emanuel case? You have a confession. Any serious police, not talking about some toy police officer, but serious police officer, who obtains a confession to a crime, will regard that as the promised land in terms of evidence. But when you have a police force, or the hierarchy of the police force, ignoring it, saying it's not, that's not good, it's pas bon, then you know there is a rot in the state of Denmark when it comes to justice. And we know that. We know that. And when they're taking their cue from a senior counsel, Lord graciously hear us. So there's much to be concerned about, because justice should not be, as Father Shapley said, it should flow like a mighty stream. And it is something which should give people hope and confidence that they count there somebody. But if the enforcement of the law is based on what type of color that you wear, then you know things have fallen apart. To quote an African author, the center cannot hold. We're in a bad space. And if we're at that point, it's only down we can go. Thank you.
Nurse, are you still there? Okay, she's not there, but Lambi, you want to take another call?
See if the person is still there. Caller, are you still there?
Yes, Lambi, good night.
Yes, good night. Go ahead, please.
Good night to the panel, Mr. G, Mr. Andre, the other Simeon.
Yes.
Gregor.
Good night. Good night.
Mr. Father Chaplain. Good night to you. I just heard Father Chaplain touch a point. I mean, somebody asked Father Chaplain a question, and he talked about the society and the people. No one cares about no one, and you don't get in much productivity. Even at work, everybody gets so selfish. You see a lot of hatred on the street. That's the way the people look at you. You're Dominican people. Most time maybe because of your character or how you look, maybe your face not attracting their eyes. Are we ready for visitors with that kind of attitude? And I mean, I've been listening for a while and I've been around on this island for a while. I've seen a lot of uprising and downfall of politicians. And some of the leaders I heard call our citizens a certain name, which I want to repeat. Sometimes they say we ignorant, we don't have memory and all those names. But Mr. Gregoire, I wanted to ask a question. You asked about how come the young people not involved in what is happening? Well, we're living in a different era. I don't know what can be done to get the conscious ones around. And I think maybe have to start with the movements with people like you, because I noticed Mr. Cesar is doing a very good work with the religious leaders on the island by getting the young people, even those that fall in on the street, to get them back, empower them. So maybe those are some of the ways, and I believe it's more consciousness, because I see Mr. Cesar is doing a movement between his peaceology, how we call it, by getting the black religious leaders from the states, and he can communicate with them through Dominica to interact. And I think this is why we're one of the movements supposed to be, because this is bigger than us. Because we in the Caribbean, we are very divided amongst ourselves. And you cannot depend on America. America self have its own issue. We will see what's happening in America now. They investigate in the White House. I won't go into the details. But from the 70s, I've been around and I get involved in certain things. And I even regret I get involved in certain things with politicians, because at the end they need to pay. But the whole consciousness with the young people, that's where it's supposed to start, as Father Chaplin say. They're the ones that go and Siemens, they're the ones that are going to be carrying the problems tomorrow. What can be done? I'm a small business person on the island, struggling a lot, but there's no response to it. And I've been speaking out for the longest while. And one of the things I noticed, they brand us and we fight amongst ourselves. Even we in a corporation and a group in politics, we fight amongst ourselves and we fall down like Humpty Dumpty. And I don't know what next to do. I was in farming, I was in tourism, and I'm in small business now. And I don't know if it's the voice of some people that can listen, that can make the leaders listen, like maybe people like Mr. Sam, maybe people like Mr. Gregoire, and that's it. Because these are the people that employ a large amount of people. And I believe that's supposed to be, if the government don't want to listen to the ordinary people, I believe these people need to give a voice. And even Mr. Gregoire need to have a youth program where the audience can listen, some young people program, because I know he knows all about the movement from the 70s. So maybe that is the way. I mean, if it's having young people, I remember he had this QTS musical training for the young people. Somehow, I don't know what next, because like I said, I don't believe the politicians are going to do not much going to change the matter, because it's all about the people. Because like I said, we was in the movement. I used to see people like Mr. Gregoire up Marigot with Richard Charles, Afi, Rosie, and to me much no change. We vote for the blind 65. The first thing we blood we kick out our leader, our representative Stephen, and Stephen was much brighter than him. And the last person he fired was himself. And I don't know what causing those things, what causing us to unite. Isilo Black and all of them, all of them had to leave the party. What causing that? It is our mindset. Good night. Have a nice night.
Good night, and thanks a lot for your contribution. Nurse Dalrymple, she asked a question also about the $64,000 a month and whether it was for 2 years, and if that 2 years is not yet up. Do you have any information on that, Dr. Andre? Your mic is muted.
Well, it's not even funny, to be honest with you. It's not even, first of all, the mere idea of in a poor country where you are paying so-called NEP workers $800 or $10 or $1,200 a month, In 1 year, I was in Dominica. One of these workers had resorted to trying to break down the credit union door in Point Michel. Couldn't get her money. And to even try to justify spending $64,000 a month, and that doesn't include the utilities, that doesn't include security. So you're probably spending closer to $80,000 or $90,000 a month on your vanity. Your vanity is dressed in the robes of Gucci, of every fancy brand you can think of. Thank God you haven't bought a $175,000 car for your child to go to school. Thank God you haven't fitted a classroom with air condition just because your son is in that class. How far can you go? Isn't there any upper limit to these excesses? How does that make Dominica a better place, a better space? A place where rulers or leaders, let me avoid that word ruler, or that might be the reality. There is no connection, no symbiotic relationship between you, the leader, and your people. You're totally divorced from the hardship. Because when you get a bobo, you fly over to the States or Guadeloupe. Thank God when you have children, you send your wife to China to have the children. So you're totally divorced from the hardships people have to endure on a daily basis at the hospital. So quite frankly, it doesn't matter to me whether or not we're in a dictatorship. As the good book says, if it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it eats like a duck, I have a suspicion it must be a duck. The only question now Dominicans face is, what do you do about this scheme of things when you are the last to be considered? Unless it is before election times when there is a stampede to buy your votes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. Lambi, you don't have a call, right? Do you?
Yes. Let's see if it's caller. Please go ahead.
All right. If you don't have that call, then I'll go over to Mr. Crispin Gregoire. I don't know if Crispin is with us. Crispin is. If you are with us, Crispin, let us know. Otherwise, I will go to Dr. Father Sharpless, because the last caller did mention Father Sharpless's name. I don't know whether you wanted to answer to that call. Crispin, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you now.
Well, Mr. G, one of the issues I wanted to talk about was was migration and remittances. Should I proceed in that arena?
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
I think, of course, we had many issues to cover, and I wanted to cover the migration. Dominica has had a long history of migration, and we can put it in different periods, starting in the 1880s with Panama, with the Panama Canal. That was the first place that Caribbean people sort of migrated to post-slavery. And it was the construction of the Panama Canal, and there were about 50,000 West Indians who migrated to Panama for the canal construction. Of course, there were a number of Dominicans in that group, but most of them came from Jamaica, Barbados, some from Trinidad, but across the region. And then that was followed in the early 1900s with Caribbean laborers who migrated to Cuba to cut cane. and the numbers of about 300,000 West Indians went to Cuba to cut cane. Then in the 1930s, the developments happening in Aruba and Curacao, the Dutch Antilles, there was a migration that also happened there, and I think Dr. Andre knows more of that. I believe his family was one of the families who did migrate to either Aruba or Curacao. And then in the 1950s, after World War II, we had the big migration of Dominicans and other West Indians to England, what is referred to as the Windrush generation. That's post-World War II, when England had to be rebuilt after World War II, and the demand for labor was significant, and a lot of West Indians migrated to England. And then with the United States, it wasn't until 1965 that migration to the United States really mushroomed. We have cases of people who migrated to the US in the early 1900s. We're talking about anywhere after 1902 going forward. But it wasn't until 1965 when the immigration law changed in the US and gave preferences to people from the Western Hemisphere. Before that, it was only white Europeans who got to migrate to the US. And after that, then we also had the Canadian domestic scheme, where Canadian or women mostly went to Canada to work as domestics. And then through family reunification, then people were able to migrate into Canada. And then we also had somewhere in the late 1960s, around 67, 68, a migration to the Virgin Islands, US Virgin Islands in particular. And then after that, the big migration that happened next was after Hurricane David, when our country was totally devastated by hurricane and people migrated. And we also saw a similar migration after Hurricane Maria. I say all of this to say that one of the things that has happened as our people have left our shores and gone to other jurisdictions to work and have a new life is that they maintain ties with home. And one of the ties that they maintain with home is that they send money back to their families. That's called remittances. And so now we have a whole body of data on what these immigrants are really contributing to our country. And the one way that to look at it in terms of remittances transfers, I figured that the easiest way to make the listening public understand how much money that the diaspora communities are sending back to Dominica, it's a significant input into the country's development. So I would say what I found was that in the data, there's not much about remittances before 1976. The figures were really small then. In 1976, for example, we had only about $1.3 million coming from the immigrants, right? And during the period 1976 to 1980, I tabulated about $19 million was what was transferred to Dominica. And this is just financial transfers. That does not include things like burials and whatever investments that people made with cash. That was transfers through banking systems. From 1981 to 1990, the immigrants sent home $132 million. In the decade of the 1990s, 1991 to 1999, the immigrants sent home $109 million. In the period 2000 to 2010, the immigrants sent back home $258 million. And that's US dollars we're talking about. In the decade of 2011 to 2020, the immigrants sent home $421.7 million US dollars. And in the period that we are currently in, 2020 to 2024, that's the 2024 being the last year that we have data for, because 2025 hasn't been tabulated yet, $184.8 million from the immigrants. Now, I should mention that at different times in the history of this remittances transfers, some things have been significant. In 2014, the immigrants reached $50 million of how much money they sent home to Dominica. And that was $50.4 million. And in 2015, the immigrants sent even more, $51.9 million. But on an average, we're talking about $40-something million in this last 20 years. It's averaging about $40 million a year. I should say that this is the largest, somebody has the mic on. This is the largest single contribution of the immigrants to Dominica. And that is the amount of money that's coming to our countries. I don't know this.
I don't know
somebody
what it is.
has them.
No, I think everybody's mic is muted. I don't know, it's coming from Lambie on the console. No, so I'm not sure if it's coming from your background, Crispin.
No, I have nobody next to me.
All right, so let's get going.
But anyway, I will proceed though. What I wanted to say is that in the period 2019 to 2024, we are seeing a decline in the amount of money that immigrants are sending. And I don't know what is the reason for that. I do know that in 2019, during COVID, that would have a negative impact on remittance flows, but that decline has continued into 2024. So it seems to me that there are factors that's driving how much money people are sending now. But the important thing that I wanted to say about these remittances are actually going to consumption. That is what I think has prevented a collapse of the Dominican economy, because the immigrants are sending money to their families who lost income from banana or agricultural production, so that our country is totally dependent on these flows from immigrants. And if you were to remove that, you could see that Dominica would be headed for a depression. I think that the diaspora could actually do more in terms of sending more. But one of the things that happened to the diaspora is that it got polarized by political action from our homeland. So that when you have bad elections and you have to depend on bringing people in to give you advantage, that really divides the diaspora, and that has contributed to a significant polarization of our diaspora communities, and that's a really unfortunate situation. Now, the last thing I wanted to say, Mr. G, is that on this remittance questions, if we take a year 2024, I just want to give the listeners a sense of what are the other islands, what is remittances in the other islands like. For 2024, Dominica got earned $48.6 million of remittances. Antigua and Barbuda, their immigrants sent home 26.3 million. St. Kitts and Nevis, the immigrants sent home 46.4 million. Barbados, 85.2 million. The Bahamas, 65.9 million. Trinidad and Tobago, 199 million. Jamaica, which depends significantly and they have a large diaspora, $3.5 billion of immigrant remittances. Haiti, $3.9 billion. And Dominican Republic, having the largest immigrant transfers, 11.25 billion, right? I hope I said 3.9 billion for Haiti and 3.5 billion for Jamaica. So that gives you a sense of how important remittances have become in Caribbean society. And really, we cannot, I would like to see in Dominica a different reality. And that is, instead of all of that money going to consumption, I would love to see even half of it go to savings so that we could build our savings base as a people. So the money that your family is sending, if they send you $5,000, that at least $2,500 would go to savings. And that is the problem we are having. All the money coming from the immigrants is going mostly to consumption. And that is a huge problem. Mr. G, I'll stop here.
Yes, but just to continue on you for 1 second, Crispin, the fact of the matter is the reason why this money is going into consumption is because the people down there are in need. I mean,
yes, of course. Well, you know what has happened to our agricultural economy. It has collapsed, and so that the people in the villages, whereas back in the 90s and they would be able to buy things with their own income. Now they have to depend. They now have to depend on their families in the diaspora to send them money. So there's a big gap. And what I'm saying is that it's like an invisible hand that is coming in from the diaspora and holding Dominica from collapsing. And that is a significant development that we need to embrace and figure out, how do we change that? How do we change all of that consumption into savings?
Well, I can assure you, and I believe Dr. Andre would probably support me here, you could change that consumption into savings if the income of the people in Dominica were to improve considerably. And certainly because some of this money that is being consumed from the diaspora remittances is going towards paying light bills and gas bills and grocery bills and telephone bills and all those things. That's what it's going towards, Dr. Andre.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. But I'm listening with great interest to Crispin about Dominicans abroad sending money to their relatives in Dominica, and Dominicans on the ground should save more. But I thought the reverse was true. Didn't our leaders say not too long ago that we are doing so well in Dominica that Dominicans in Dominica have to be sending money to their relatives in the United States and elsewhere? Is there something I'm missing? Isn't that what was being said?
That was what
That's exactly what was being said. So again, it's amazing people buy these false types of utterances without any question and so on. But the problem is, to the extent that Dominicans use most of the money to survive, how can we blame them? Take Domlec. Domlec was purchased, the majority owner is the government. My understanding of governance is that when a government takes over or buys a controlling share in a utility used by everybody, it does so for one specific purpose: to reduce the cost of the utility to its people. Is that the case in Dominica? What about the Wasco? Huh? What about the Wasco? Now, you remember when they started geothermal work with so much fanfare? Dominicans going to enjoy this wonderful reduction in price. That's over 10 years ago. Persons who know better than I have said that they have spent over $100 million on this thing. Has there been a forensic accounting of how that money has been spent? Let me promise you one thing. They will never have one. Because we know, we're not blind, that much of that money has been siphoned off and has found its way into the pockets of some persons. So this is the thing. We can't blame the folk if they're using all the money, because very few people, even businesses, are complaining about the cost of electricity. And certainly the cost of, we don't have 365 rivers, but they're now talking about exporting water. But they're not talking at the same time about providing relief in terms of the cost of water to the person on the ground who, quite frankly, would be happy for a little relief. In the 60s and 70s, even in the 80s, some of the governments would have income substitution, reduction of prices or taxes on staples. Huh? Do we have any of that today to provide a little relief to pensioners who live on $300 a month? Or let's make it $4 or $5. Huh? When you have to pay a service provider, whether it's Flow or whatever, $180 a month or thereabouts. Let's say $150. Because they have to have a phone to keep in touch with their relatives. They have to be able to watch television because there's no other entertainment. You know, what relief has been received by persons who, quite frankly, live at the bottom of the economic ladder? There's none. So the whole question of governance is not something which is being done or prosecuted on behalf of the people. How can we have millions and millions of dollars hidden in mysterious accounts and you have that degree of hardship on the ground? How can it be? How can we not afford proper garbage trucks? Not those who stall on the port. Proper garbage trucks. How can we not have boats? I grew up in Portsmouth in the 60s. I remember schooners from every island coming in, going into the interior, coming down with truckloads of bananas, provisions, oranges, grapefruits. I went on a couple trips on one of these boats, and the captains were not even Dominicans. There was a brisk trade. Persons would descend down the tongue every fortnight, buying their groceries, going back, going to Longhouse. Where is that activity? It's disappeared. Because if not selling passports, then what? Well, look at where passport has taken us. Huh? Those who trumpeted that heresy, what are they saying now? But they don't care. They've already hidden much of the wealth. Some of them make sure that they've gotten their green cards. Well, I guess, as Eric Williams used to say, we go see how those green cards will be treated if any of those folks dare to leave the United States and come to Dominica and try to go back. And this is why we have this most recent manifestation of electoral gerrymandering. Because of the Trump measures, the hordes who would come down on the even election, stick it to Dominica, take off, preach about the democratic rights. You'll see how much democratic rights they're talking about now, because they will not dare come to do precisely that. And hence the political directorate had to find another means of stealing the elections. And hence we have this travesty called reconfirmation or confirmation. Confirmation without going to church, confirmation without a veil, confirmation without wearing white, confirmation where what you wear is darkness, because that's exactly what it is all about. The darkness to cheat and to steal. How can we talk about what peace and justice in that type of context, in that type of environment? We better wake up. We better wake up. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. Now, before I go to Father Sharpless for making his closing remark, Crispin, I wanted to go back to you very quickly on this question of the geothermal project. I mean, from your limited knowledge of what's going on right now, the stage that we're at now, do you anticipate that that geothermal plant will produce electricity at a lower rate than the rate that now exists with Domlec? And how much of the island do you expect that that plant will cover?
Right. Well, Mr. G, the first thing, I'm not as bright as my other colleagues who know mathematics more than me, but I will say that my little matchbox knowledge of math will say, if your installed demand is 20 megawatts and you're building a geothermal plant to replace fossil fuels with a 10 megawatt, I don't see how the price of electricity will go down. That's one. We hear a lot of flowery language about, oh, this geothermal and so on, which I think is a good thing that we are finally harnessing geothermal. We should have gotten there a long time ago, but the approach that was taken has taken us 25 years. Here's what my biggest concern is. After the government established the Dominica Geothermal Company, they saw it fit to hand over the geothermal program to an Israeli company. And I call Ormat. This is the same company that is in Guadeloupe, and I believe they are co-owners or part owners of the geothermal plant in a place called Bouillante in Guadeloupe. So I thought that we were building a geothermal company, but it seems that along the way we decided that it was better to let this Israeli company come and run our affairs. And the sad part about it, Mr. G, is that the Israeli company is not bringing any investment into the geothermal program. They're actually a management company, and they will be the ones who will spend all of the money that has been approved for building the plant. And I think that's a retrogressive step. I believe that if we were really serious about building a geothermal company, we would have trained a number of people well before. And that was the original plan. The plan was to train Dominican engineers in Iceland. Iceland was our technical partner. For some reason, Iceland was dropped. The training of Dominican engineers in geothermal engineering did not happen as planned. And so we have to hand it over to an Israeli company and basically bring the Israel-Palestinian conflict into Dominica. I'm just at a loss to understand the genius of the people who think that they've done so well in geothermal. All I'm saying is that the geothermal program has escaped from our hands into foreigners' hands, and that's an unfortunate retrogressive development.
Yes, thank you for that, Crispin. Father Herman Sharpless, could you give us the benefit now of your brilliance in the closing remarks? And your mic is muted, of course, so you want to unmute your mic.
I will mute myself. Yeah, thanks. And thanks a lot again for inviting me. I noticed that Simeon is no longer with us, but
Yeah, Simeon dropped off because his internet was giving him a
was
problem.
giving issues. Okay, but to close up, I want to close up on 2 points. First, we didn't get to cover the whole concept of the environment, but I want to make some points on that. Catholic views the Catholic Church view the environment and the care of the environment as a moral imperative rooted in the goodness of creation, demanding stewardship rather than exploitation. That's how the church views the environment, as stewardship. Because if you go back to the book of Genesis, he says man was given the power to care for the creation and hand the creation better than they met it to the next generation. It is emphasized that the natural resources are destined for the common good, linking ecological health directly to social justice, especially for the poor, as highlighted in Pope Francis Laudate Si, and that's an encyclical which Pope Francis wrote about the creation. Key aspect of the environmental theology for the church is stewardship over dominion, so that creation is not something that we dominate, but it's something that we are stewards of. Humanity is called to be stewards of creation, protecting and cultivating the earth, not absolutely masters over the earth. Universal destination of goods. God gave the earth to the entire human race. Thus, the use of resources must be fair and sustainable to all people, including future generations. So if we are conscious of that, any decision we make, anything we do today, we'll be more conscious of how does it affect the next generation. But I think, again, we have become so selfish. Everybody's more concerned about themselves. And all the issues that we have spoken about really boils down to people's what is in it for me, rather than what is in it for the other. Eco-conversation spirituality, a profound inner conversation is needed to combat the throwaway culture and recognize the intrinsic value of nature as a reflection of God. We have a big job ahead of us. And the key points that the Pope brought up in that document, he says, he calls for an integral ecology where everything is interconnected. So all these damages we see going on in our society, are they interconnected? Are they only geared towards achieving one goal? Or do we look at it as something that brings a better environment with our whatever development thrust we have? But ultimately, at the end of the process, it just makes our society a better society. So therefore, I mean, I spoke a lot about the injustices, and I would like to end by making the statement: the interdependence of peace and justice. True, lasting peace is not merely the absence of conflict, negative peace, but rather the presence of justice and equity, positive peace. Without justice, peace is often a facade or a quiet war. We have to cultivate a culture of justice and peace in the society if we are to see things changing. Because oftentimes, those of us who are pushing forward the reality that now exists, we don't realize it doesn't last forever. Nothing in this life lasts forever. No matter how powerful, no matter how much influence you have today, there is nothing that says it will always be there. History has taught that to us in several ways. People who thought that they would be there, they are no longer there. Look at what happened in Venezuela with Maduro. He's not there anymore. Somebody else is there. And in life, we must see our calling as coming there to make it better, not coming there to make it better for ourselves. And that is something the society has to look at very, very strongly. If it continues where we are going, there will never be peace, neither will there be justice. Thank you.
And thank you so much for these words of wisdom, the Sharpless. Crispin, your closing remarks.
Yes, well, Mr. G, I would like to again emphasize the great value of civil society development. We just absolutely cannot develop Dominica without having a vibrant civil society. And what do I mean by that? It means fostering independent, non-governmental organizations such as nonprofits, advocacy groups, community associations that operate outside the state and market to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, and deliver social services. Civil society allows for enhancing governance through accountability, to ensure inclusive development, and to fill service gaps. Basically, government alone cannot do it. There's no way any country can develop without a vibrant civil society. And what has happened over the last 20 years, we see a trampling of civil society. We see repression against civil society, and such things cannot be allowed to fester and continue. Mr. G, thank you very much for having me.
And thank you so much, Crispin, for your closing remarks. Dr. Andre, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. Let me commend the panelists, including Simeon, who's not with us, for their excellent presentations this evening. And I think they're basically singing from the same hymn book. When we're talking about peace and justice, we may not be able to define it with any great degree of precision, but we have a general idea as to what it means, what it looks like, what it stands for. And I think certainly in the case of Dominica, what we have to ask ourselves is something along the following lines. Do you, as a leader, sacrifice your island's precious stones on the altar of greed? Do you sacrifice the welfare and well-being of your people? Do you sacrifice what God has given you in terms of the environment? Do you sacrifice the health of your people? Do you sacrifice those intrinsic assets of the state, be it passports, be it parrots, be it people, for a few dollars more? And the converse of that position, in my view, is what are the responsibilities of citizenhood? What do you do? Or what is it that you cannot afford not to do? Which is to say, to do nothing. What in your past, in your historical memory, can you rely upon to turn that tide which can only lead to, quite frankly, destruction of what you know and what you've taken for granted? What in our history can help us, help ourselves, put food on the table? What about the Kudme spirit? Huh? What about, I can't speak for you, Mr. G, because I know that you always had a suitcase under your mattress laden with cash. What about the susu? That's how they used to call it, the susu thing, where the ladies, I remember that in Portsmouth, the ladies would contribute a modest amount of money every month or every 2 weeks, whatever it was.
As a sub.
A sub. And they would use that to survive. What about those things? What about communal sales? What if, for example, I have a bunch of bananas and you have a half bag of dashin or whatever it is, and you resort to that barter system at a certain level if you can't sell your items to make ends meet? What about resuscitating those cherished values that enabled so many generations of Dominica to survive? Measures which are more important now because all avenues of wealth creation are being dried up. Are being dried up. Because if you don't get the dispensation to sell passports, you are stuck. That's the problem. You may get a little brown paper bag and so on, but it's just enough to make you come back and beg for more. So it doesn't sustain you. It just makes you more dependent. And how can you talk about development when what you have is an increase in dependency? The increase in dependency is a very negation of development. What values do the good book teach us in terms of what we can do to empower ourselves? Father Sharpless has made some reference to some of those values, some of those cherished values. And it seems to me that we have to seriously reflect on those values if we are to survive. Because survival will not be in the form of a white knight on some big white horse coming from England, America, or Europe. White horse or that development, that salvation, temporal salvation, will come from one of these politicians to talk about the little man inside. Well, you better wake up that little man or woman too, because if you don't, he will fall asleep in a perpetual slumber, and there will be no Lazarus on the horizon to resuscitate us or to rescue us from that doom that is right there staring at us on the horizon. We can change that scheme of things entire, but we have to rely on our own resources, and we have to educate the person next to you that there is no other way. Handouts will not do you anything. Well, I'm wrong. It will just make you more dependent, more reliant, more vulnerable to be exploited. And that's the last state of affairs that Dominicans should aspire to be dependent and to be amenable and susceptible to being exploited. So I leave you with those thoughts, but they are thoughts worth contemplating, because again, as I said, if we don't take care of ourselves, as the good book preaches, he upstairs, God, only helps those who help themselves. And as far as I'm concerned, so should it be. So shall it be. Because if we are not prepared to help ourselves, then we are not deserving of any help. Thank you very much, Mr. Chief.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. And that's just left for me to say, excellent program tonight. I want to say good night to all the folks who were with us on Facebook and on YouTube and on the radio listening in their vehicles or at home or on their tablets or their phones. Thank you so much for sticking with us tonight on this wonderful topic. And let me just say good night, therefore, to Crispin Gregoire and Simeon Joseph and Father Sharpless, and to you, Dr. Andre and Lambi and Sherwin. Good job, gentlemen. We'll see you again next time. Take care and have a good night, everybody.
Good night, and again, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Take care.
Excellent.
Okay, good night, everybody. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Bye. God bless.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from. Understanding our past. Embracing our present. Starting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty. Embracing justice. Peace.